As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
So, as we know, Ukraine was first promised that it would eventually become a NATO member at a 2008 summit in Bucharest, despite the issue being a major red line for Russia. But Kiev's never gotten a timeline on membership, and they still have not gotten that. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg insisted that the commitments made to Ukraine on Tuesday were a strong package. The alliance agreed to form a new NATO-Ukraine Council to advance political dialogue, engage cooperation, and things like that. And according to a NATO press release, allies also agreed to a new multi-year assistance program to facilitate the transition of the Ukrainian armed forces from Soviet era to NATO standards and help rebuild Ukraine's security and defense sector. So, I think we're going to see individual commitments from certain countries announcing, kind of long-term military aid. I think that's expected on Wednesday. I know the G7 countries are planning something like that. The White House said Tuesday that NATO membership for Ukraine is not going to happen anytime soon, since it would mean war with Russia. This is National Security Council spokesman John Kirby. He told CNN, quote, "Of course they are at war right now, so NATO membership in the immediate future isn't likely because that would put NATO at war with Russia," end quote. And this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. French President Emmanuel Macron announced that Paris will join London in providing long-range cruise missiles to Kiev. So Macron said that in view of the situation and the Ukrainian counteroffensive, he has decided to deliver, increase in military aid, and that they will give what he's calling long-range strike missiles to Ukraine. So Paris will send Kiev the Scalp air-launched long-range cruise missile, which has about the same range as the Storm Shadow missiles that the British have provided, which is a range of over 150 miles. And these also are air-launched, so they could be fired by Ukraine's fighter jets. So National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said Tuesday that the Biden administration will move forward with a $20 billion sale of Lockheed Martin-made F-16 fighter jets to Turkey. Sullivan's comments came a day after Turkey's President Erdogan agreed to back Sweden's NATO bid after over a year of negotiations. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said that Erdogan would submit Sweden's NATO bid to Turkey's parliament for approval. So Sullivan insisted that the F-16 sale to Turkey and the issue of Sweden's NATO bid were not related, but it's very clear that they are. President Biden actually said so basically himself back in May after he spoke with Erdogan on the phone. Biden said after that conversation, quote, "He still wants to work on something on the F-16s. I told him we wanted to deal with Sweden, so let's get that done, and then we'll be back in touch with one another," end quote. So the last story here, U.S. says that Iran is not trying to make a nuclear bomb. So a new U.S. intelligence report has reaffirmed that Iran is not trying to build nuclear weapons, despite constant claims made by Israel and Western media outlets to the contrary. So an unclassified summary of the report from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence read, quote, "Iran is not currently undertaking the key nuclear weapons development activities that would be necessary to produce a testable nuclear device," end quote. The report noted that Iran has taken steps to increase uranium enrichment. Iran has been enriching some uranium at 60%, and it took that step in 2021 in response to an Israeli attack on the Natanz nuclear facility in Iran. So Israeli pressure and attacks have only increased Iran's nuclear activity. But 90% enrichment is needed for weapons-grade uranium, and there's no sign that Tehran is looking to bring enrichment to that level. The DNI report said that Iran was enriching uranium beyond the limits imposed by the 2015 nuclear deal, known as the JCPOA. But those limits are not relevant. You'll see the way the media covers this. They say Iran is violating the JCPOA. But the limits are relevant because the U.S. withdrew from the JCPOA in 2018 by reimposing sanctions. And after the U.S. withdrew, Iran waited 1 year before it started slowly, building up more enriched uranium. But for a while, it kept enrichment at the rate, which under the JCPOA is 3.67%, which is pretty low. So last year, the Pentagon's Nuclear Posture Review also concluded that Iran was not developing nuclear weapons. Israel has been threatening to attack Iran over its nuclear program, although recently the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has scaled back its rhetoric a bit on the issue. And, this is amid these reports that the U.S. and Iran have been holding indirect negotiations, although I haven't heard about that for a little while now. So that's not too, I don't know. It doesn't seem like they're really going to reach a deal. But it was noteworthy, I thought, on June 30th, Netanyahu's national security advisor said that Israel was not getting closer to bombing Iran, because the Iranians stopped for enriching uranium to the level that Israel considers a red line. Iran didn't change anything. Israel's just kind of toning down its rhetoric.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
Yeah, take a look at this. This is the NATO big meeting today. Look at these. Look at this. The girl leads them out. Oh, yeah. And now they all stand in line. Hey, fuck faces. You're there for a fucking meeting. What's this clown show? Look at these shitheads that are running our life. No need for NATO. I am an American. You fucking European pricks. And I couldn't say the other word, Queenie. You've been fucking killing each other for centuries. And it keeps on going. Look at this looking fucking clown show. It's theater. It's nothing more than theater. And these are the people that are running our fucking lives. Fuck you, NATO. Up your NATO ass. I, Gerald Salenti, am an American. No need for NATO. Look at this. Look at this clown fucking show. Calm down, Salenti. Be a clown and suck up. Hey, how about the picture on the front page of today's Wall Street Journal? $5. $5 a day to see this shit. There he is at Windsor. Biden gets royal welcome. Look at all these fucking clowns dressed up in that fucking drag. Look at this shit. Oh, we're royal. Biden gets a royal welcome. Biden doesn't piss or shit, and neither does the Prince Charles. Oh, no, now he's the king. Yeah. Here, king. Here, boy. Sit. Give me a paw. Down. Look at this fucking crap. This is what the fucking war is about. Once upon a time, not too long ago, there was a guy by the name of Mikhail Gorbachev who was running the Soviet Union. He broke up the Soviet Union, and the deal he made between the United States and NATO, when he broke it up and pulled the troops out of Eastern Europe, was that NATO would not move 1 inch further. There were 16 NATO countries. Now there were 30. They bring Ukraine in. This war is going to keep on going. And we are on the verge of nuclear annihilation. Have a nice day. Commercial real estate values have crashed in key U.S. cities. Remote work bites office buildings, secondary economy. Remote work is spreading throughout the economy. Why so few empty offices will be converted into apartments. Again, all the details here, all the details. And again, what's going on in Chapter 11, bankruptcies are going through the roof. We are on the verge of an economic collapse. So here's the deal. The Fed says they're going to raise interest rates 2 more times. The ECB is expected to raise them too. So they meet in July, they raise them in the U.S. They're going to be coming 1 more time, right? That's the beginning of the death of the dollar. The lower interest rates fall, the weaker the dollar goes, and the higher gold prices go. Oh, and by the way, oil prices, Brent crude, it's back to almost $80 a barrel now. Yeah, that means inflation is going to go back up in a lot of different ways. And inflation's here to stay. When you look at, oh, the prices are coming down, the inflation is going down. The fucking prices of houses aren't going down, they're going back up. An automobile costs almost $50,000 to buy. Hotel prices going up. Motel prices going up. A bunch of food commodity prices going up. Oh, they're going to come down a little bit, but they're still way high. Wall Street Journal on Friday. Look at this. 100 days. Yep. This guy who's a Russian correspondent for the Wall Street Journal that was locked up, they call him a spy. That's big, the whole paper. Look at this paper here. Look. All right? How about Assange? How come you're not fucking writing about Assange? He's only been in jail since 2019 and been locked up in one of the embassies. I think it was El Salvador for about 10 years or something. Not a word about Assange. How about Snowden? Nah, fuck them. What hypocrisy? What hypocrisy? Assange didn't do anything. All he did was report stuff. His life ruined. Anyway, oh, here's a good one. Japan gets final approval to release radioactive waste from Fukushima into the Pacific. Isn't that great? Don't worry about it. It won't hurt you. It's fine. You worried about climate change? Anyway, a lot more. Trends in High-Tech Science by Ben Davis.
Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
When the case got started, the only way that they could bring this case is if they had more than just mere suspicion that the government was involved in this. So they must have seen, I don't know, some Freedom of Information emails or something that told them, yes, you were actually named by name in correspondence from the White House. So that's what I'm a little bit fuzzy on. What was it that they initially grabbed onto to say, wait a minute, now we have a smoking gun and we're going to court?
Well, one of the biggest smoking guns is actually the hubris of the government, because Jen Psaki, Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, and others openly and publicly threatened to hold social media companies accountable. Even the president did this. President Biden openly threatened, if they don't start to play ball with our demands to censor content, we will then consider what the technicalities of Section 230 protection that they have. We'll take a look at that. They had committee hearings where the heads of these social media companies were in there and they were being threatened. And then they had their individual plaintiffs, and their individual plaintiffs had examples of what had happened to them. And there was also the case of Alex Berenson that had been ongoing for quite a while. And there were some other material that was publicly available that was enough for them to write their first complaint. It's been amended twice since. So since the first complaint and the Twitter files came out and a whole bunch of other information, that complaint has been updated and amended. And then, of course, they started getting discovery from the government, which was a long and storied tale and a lot of wrangling back and forth between them and the Fifth Circuit, because the government had filed a mandamus petition at the Fifth Circuit to try and stop this judge from allowing some of the things he's allowed. And the Fifth Circuit basically shot them down every time. So the initial thing was their hubris, them publicly stating multiple times that they would take action if the social media companies didn't do as they were asking.
Well, no, I'm not anybody who wants to defend pre-Elon Twitter, but it is interesting to note that in some of the correspondence between Twitter and the federal government, when some official would say, look, we want you to take a look at this account or this tweet or whatever, it was interesting to see in the documents that we have how many times even the stupid old Twitter would say, look, it doesn't seem like this tweet or this account violates our terms of service, so sorry, there's nothing we can do. That actually surprised me. But in a way, I'm very, very pleased to hear that, because then that means that when they did start going after these accounts, it's obviously not because they had it out for these people necessarily. Obviously, pressure was put on them because they were initially resisting. What's the nature of the government's case here? How are they trying to argue their way out of this?
They really aren't. Like, when I was sitting in that hearing, I went to Louisiana and I sat in the courtroom. I was the only one there from the media. And I was listening to this 8-hour-long hearing. And the judge had come to the government and said, I need to ask your opinion on a series of statements. I'm going to read a statement and please tell me whether or not you think this is protected free speech under the First Amendment. And some of the statements he read were, the COVID-19 vaccine doesn't work. The 2020 election was stolen. Joe Biden is the reason that gas prices are high. And there were several others. And the government could not admit in open federal court that those statements were protected free speech under the First Amendment. And when they were cornered about this, Tom, they said something absolutely insane. It depends on who's saying them, was their response. If an American is saying them, we don't know whether or not that American is being paid by a foreign government and could be guilty of FARA violations. Like,
wow,
grandma in her living room talking about the 2020 election is somehow working for Russia and being paid by Russia, and they need to be able to censor that just in case. Could be a crime. My mouth was hanging open. I could not believe what I was hearing.
What was Dr. Fauci's deposition like?
It was 110 lies. He lied 110 times.
But was he not mostly saying that he couldn't remember? And I mean, you can't strictly prove whether he can remember.
Yes, he was saying he didn't remember for nearly every single question. However, you can prove that he remembered when there are several dozen emails surrounding a topic that are of the utmost importance, marked so in an inbox with your top advisors in the middle of the biggest crisis we've ever had. So it's pretty clear. And they actually outlined all of those instances in a statement of facts that the plaintiffs submitted. And they said he lied. They said it outright that he lied. So yeah, his deposition was basically useless, but it was telling.
So I'm pretty sure he claimed that he had no recollection of the email with Francis Collins, where they decided that somebody needs to get on these Great Barrington Declaration scientists and smash them good and hard, or whatever the wording was. I think he claimed he had no recollection of that.
Correct. Yes.
And that's the whole thing. I think that kind of was the whole thing. And the thing is, if you were Dr. Fauci and you're in that situation and you want 100% compliance and you want everybody on board and you have several scholars from top universities openly contradicting you in a document that's attracting hundreds of thousands of signatures in a matter of days, I'm sorry, I don't think that's something you forget.
Brian would write it that way.
And incidentally, this kind of case reminds us of the importance, and I know this sounds like a cliche because people have said it for so many years, but the importance of judges, the importance of the selection of judges and who is choosing judges. And the thing is, that was the kind of argument that would be trotted out when you were very unhappy having to cast a vote for George W. Bush, because this guy is a dope and a blockhead and a warmonger, and I can't vote for him. People would say, but you don't want the other side appointing the judges. Well, okay, half the time when the George W. Bushes of the world would appoint the judges, they weren't so good either. But that argument has been raised for years and years and years. But I think now we really are seeing the significance of and the importance of that argument. It does mean something, because at this point we have a country that is so divided. Some of the country thinks it's okay to censor people. Gender ideology has radically divided the country. We've got a sorority that is suing over the admission of a transgender applicant, saying that this is obviously a man coming into our sorority. Well, you can only decide that one way or the other. Either the person can come in or the person can't come in. And that's going to depend on who was appointed to be the judge in that case.
You're listening to Part of the Problem on the Gas Digital Network.
What is Kamala Harris's answer to that gibberish question?
Well, I think culture is a reflection of our moment and our time, right? And present culture is the way we express how we're feeling about the moment. And we should always find times to express how we feel about the moment that is a reflection of joy, because it comes in the morning. We have to find ways to also express the way we feel about the moment in terms of just having language and a connection to how people are experiencing life. And
as someone who speaks for a living, I'm so envious of her ability to just be like, it's almost like her brain checks out and she's like, I'm going to go on autopilot mode right now. And somewhere in there, her brain is like, we're just fucking doing this, like, am I right? And she's like, culture is just how you feel, and how you feel is what you do, and what you do is how you feel, and that's now in the morning. And like, she's just like, you're the vice president of the United States of America, and she's just fucking rolling. Like, you haven't said anything, you psychopath.
I feel like maybe she's cooler than we give her credit for, and before she goes on stage, she just takes a hero dose of mushrooms.
That would
at least make sense. Because this sounds like any time you've been with your friend and they think they're like on all the drugs and they've just figured out the universe.
This would make, Rob, perfect sense if at the end of that statement she went, I'm sorry, I'm tripping my fucking balls off right now. I'm just sorry. What was the question again?
Because I was talking about moments and time and things that you can't comprehend.
I'm just saying they found drugs at the White House and everyone's blaming Hunter Biden, a stand-up gentleman, if you ask me. And I'm saying no one's looking this way. But I will say this, and Spike Cohen tweeted something about this the other day. I love Spike, by the way, if you guys don't know who he is. Great all right, a lot of you know. Great fucking libertarian. And he tweeted this, and it was kind of like, in some ways, like the basic libertarian point, but at the same time, sometimes you need to be reminded of that stuff, because you'll like almost get away from it. But really, to me, the story of all of this, which is so crazy, is that, dude, look, cocaine is this powder. It's like this fucking this substance that's a powder that makes Rob feel like he's on top of the world, even though his dick doesn't work, right? Whatever. But there are hundreds of thousands of people in this country, in every city, in every state of this nation. There are people, human beings, just like all of us, locked in a cage for decades over having this powder. Like, they will send fucking SWAT teams into your fucking home and shoot your dog and traumatize your baby and fucking wife and all this if they suspect you have this powder in your home. And yet they found this powder in the White House, and there's not like a lockdown, there's not a review of every fucking camera. It's just like, we found it here, shit happens. Like, isn't that fucking insane? Isn't that like the most blatant example of like this two-tiered system where like what they would do to you versus what they would do to their own? Like, if as soon as they think it might be someone important who had this, we all know no one's going to jail over this shit. No one's life's going to be ruined. But if it were you, they would they would literally drag your kid away from you. Then if you tried to resist, they'd kill you over this shit. Over this dumb little powder that makes all your bad thoughts into good thoughts. No, I'm just kidding. You shouldn't do it. But if you do, it's a rush. Anyway, I'm just saying, they'd murder you over this. But this'll just be kind of, and that's what's crazy is that there'll be a lot of people like, look, the Dan Bonginos of the world will be like, no, this was definitely a family member and blah, blah, blah. And this, maybe he's right. The progressives will be like, this is a non-story, some visitor, had it or whatever. But really you're like, no, the real story here is like, how do you guys, the government, get to wage a war on us? And then when it's you, fucking nothing happens. You know what I mean? Like, fuck?
That there's now a death penalty. And we passed it a couple years ago. If you are a major drug dealer involved in the trafficking of drugs and murder results in your activities, you go to death. And a number of other severe penalties. We changed the law so that if you are arrested and you are a drug dealer, under our forfeiture statutes, the government can, take everything you own. Everything from your car to your house, your bank account, not merely what they confiscate in terms of the dollars from the transaction that you just got caught engaged.
So here's fucking another crazy thing, right? You guys ever heard of the Iran-Contra fucking scandal, right? So literally, this is a few years after that. This is only 3 years after all that fucking shit went down. Maybe a little bit more than that. About a little bit more than that. 5 years maybe after that. So basically, and this is a fact now, right? That Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush got caught for sponsoring fucking Nicaraguan drug dealers who shipped cocaine into America. Like, a huge aspect of the crack epidemic was that our fucking government they were fighting the fucking commies in Nicaragua. So the Reagan administration decided they were going to sponsor them. They were going to support the guys who were fighting the commies. But those guys were drug dealers. And so they helped them as they shipped cocaine into America. So the same time, yeah, they were cool. But at the same time, as they were supporting these really cool Nicaraguans, they were launching this fucking war on drugs or ramping it up. And so they're arresting everyone. Oh, if you have a fucking quarter's worth of this shit, you're going to do a fucking 5-year drug sentence. But they were paying the people who were shipping it in.
The Peter Schiff Show.
High. So we have had an improvement relative to where we were then. But we haven't gone anywhere near 2%, nor do I think we're going to get to 2%. That's what the market doesn't seem to understand. And I mentioned this in my last podcast, that the dollar was very weak following the weaker than expected jobs report that we got on Friday. And now it's down again today. And oil, as I said, continues to rise. It's been creeping higher all week. It's not up dramatically today. It's up about half a buck, but we're now at 75.22. We were at $68 last week. So we're seeing a nice move up. I think there's a lot of momentum. It's not just in oil. Commodities across the board are having a very strong day. Obviously, the precious metals having a strong day as well. But the point I'm really trying to make here is that the better than expected inflation numbers are actually a catalyst for future inflation to be higher. Anyone who is looking at the recent improvements in the CPI is basically looking in the rearview mirror. They're ignoring what's happening through the windshield, which is the dollar tanking. And in fact, I think if the dollar breaks much more, I think the dollar index is going to make a sharp move from 100 to 90. There's some support down at 90 on the dollar index. And so I would expect that if the dollar does break about 10%, it will stop falling, at least for a while, at 90. I mean, if it doesn't bounce off at 90, then it's in even more trouble than I suspect. I mean, it's in a lot of trouble, but it should bounce off of that level just looking at a chart. But that's a big drop. That's a 10% decline. If we get a 10% decline in the dollar in a very short period of time, maybe the next month or two, that should really ignite a fire in the commodity markets, particularly in oil. I would expect the oil price to shoot above $100 a barrel if we get a 10% drop in the dollar. I also would expect gold to make a new record high. It'll probably move above $2,100 an ounce if that, in fact, does happen. But the point is, if we get this big break in the dollar, that is going to filter through to the CPI. It's going to put a lot of upward pressure on the CPI because a lot of the downward pressure has come from falling commodity prices, particularly energy prices. Why did commodity prices fall? Well, because the dollar rose as a result of anticipation of a tighter Fed fighting inflation, hiking interest rates. That brought down commodities, which helped bring down the CPI. But now that investors are smelling the end of the hikes and are starting to get a whiff of the cuts, the dollar is getting clobbered. And this is very inflationary because not only is it going to push up commodity prices in general, but a weaker dollar is going to push up all of our import prices. Everything we import is going to cost more. So these record trade deficits are going to go to new highs because the weak dollar is going to make everything we import more expensive. A lot of people try to say that, well, if you have a weak currency, that will reduce your trade deficit because it'll help your exports. Well, it's not really going to help our exports because we don't export that much. I mean, we export food and things like that, but the stuff that we import, we can't produce. So it's not like we could just switch to a domestic source when the dollar goes down and imports get more expensive. We just have to pay more for those imports. It really is amazing that we went over a decade with these sub 2% inflation numbers. It lulled a lot of people and central bankers into a false sense of complacency, and a lot of people expect those days to return. They still don't understand how much of an aberration that was, and they don't understand the extenuating circumstances that made that possible. It was the voracious appetite for U.S. dollars by the BRICS, by China, by India, by Saudi Arabia, by Russia, Japan, which is not a BRIC, but a lot of these countries were gobbling up dollars. That enabled us to export all of the inflation that we were creating. We're not going to be able to do that anymore. We're going to be re-importing that inflation as our trading partners send it back to us. They do that by spending their dollars, by taking the dollars that they had in U.S. treasuries and buying stuff, whatever we got. They're just going to buy it and they're going to bid up the price. Oh, by the way, before I forget, I didn't mention this on the last podcast, but even though that the job number was a big disappointment, the major contributor to jobs, I forget the number, I don't have it in front of me anymore, but it was government jobs. Government jobs was the biggest component of that weaker than expected report. And these government jobs are particularly inflationary. Why? Because when you put people on the government payroll, the government has to pay their salaries. Well, where does the government get the money to pay their salaries? It prints it. It runs larger deficits. That's where the money is coming from. You know, these workers aren't generating profits. You know, they're just expenses that the government has, and the government has to pay their salaries. The other problem is they don't produce anything. These government workers are not adding to the pool of goods that people can consume, but they're going to subtract from that pool because they're going to take their government paychecks and spend them. They're going to buy stuff that they didn't help produce with those paychecks. But the bigger picture, again, is that we're not going back to those sub 2% days, because this is not just about COVID. COVID really, was kind of like the spark that lit the powder keg. And I talked about that in real time. I talked about the absurdity of that monetary and fiscal policy combination in early 2020. I was one of the few people who was warning about inflation early in COVID when everybody else was talking deflation. Everybody was saying, oh, demand's really going down because of COVID, because everybody's staying at home. I was a guy that pointed out, no, it's not going down. Demand is going up because everybody is getting their stimulus money. People have more money to spend during COVID than they had before COVID. But I also pointed out the fact that we weren't producing. So supply was going down as demand was going up. So that really just it lit the fuse.
So let's listen to, in his own words, Stoltenberg spilling the beans on this whole thing.
I agree that the most imminent task now is to ensure that Ukraine prevails as a sovereign, independent nation in Europe. So the most important thing we can do is to continue to provide weapons, ammunition, military support to Ukraine, because unless Ukraine prevails as a nation, as a democratic nation in Europe, there is no issue to be discussed about security guarantees or membership in NATO at all. I agree that the most
what he's saying, Dr. Paul, is that we're going to keep doing what we have been doing, i.e. providing weapons that is clearly not working. We're going to do the same thing and hope for different results.
Yeah.
That's basically it.
That's not a new policy. Yeah. That's been going on for a long time. We're provoking, once again, the whole situation there. But we were criticizing China for talking to Russia.
Yeah.
We put sanctions on both of them, and then they started saying, hey, let's talk this over. What are we doing? Could we alter this and do some trading? And then if they do some trading above board and they don't use weapons to do it, and then they start outclassing us in some of our sales and moving ahead, then all of a sudden, and even NATO has to go along, because evidently that was the American position, slam China, So that to me, that might have been one of the biggest deals that they sneak in there, and they have to pursue that, because if you listen to the U.S. Congress, see, that's going to be an easy fight to motivate the Congress, is the China issue. So that to me is a shame that that's happening, and this whole idea that we own the world, and we can put on sanctions and boycott and blockade and everything else, but if somebody else does it, then you shouldn't do that. That's not being nice. We don't like you for that.
You're right. I mean, that exposes the whole hypocrisy, because when it comes to Ukraine, then the U.S. says, well, Ukraine has the right to choose its own alliances. If it wants to join NATO, that's fine. But then with China aligning with Russia, they don't have any right to do this. How dare they do this? So, and the rest of the world sees this. You know, they're not a bunch of dopes out there. They know what's going on. So anyway, let's move on to our second story. This is kind of an interesting story because we saw this on Zero Hedge yesterday. We know the recent Supreme Court decision about affirmative action. A lot of people are cheering that decision, that it is proven to be unconstitutional. Let's put up this next clip because the reaction among black Americans is kind of interesting. They did a poll right after that, and this is the headline: more black Americans support the Supreme Court affirmative action ruling than oppose it, according to a new poll from YouGov and The Economist. If you go to the next one, this is from that same article. According to the poll, 44% of black respondents said they at least somewhat support the recent rulings in Students for Fair Admissions versus the University of North Carolina and Harvard, which eliminated race-based admissions practices from college campuses. Only 36% of blacks polled approve. So more African Americans are saying, yeah, we don't like affirmative action, than the ones that are saying, yeah, we got to keep it going. That's kind of an interesting development.
You know, what this does, it refreshes some people's memory that all this affirmative action is faking.
Yep.
Faking this need, this moral high ground that they have to help people. And there may be some need for that. When there's a policy like enslaving people, yes, you can specifically state it and say what has to be done. But all this affirmative action and reparations, this gets way out of control. And that's based on the assumption that on a daily basis, it's political power. They can go back 100 years and say, so such and such happened that we have to do this. But it's based on the assumption that the minorities who want or need help for various reasons, you know, they need this help and they're incapable of doing it themselves.
Yeah.
I remember so clearly, Walter Williams, a good friend of mine who's passed away, is a libertarian black economist, which was a great combination because he could speak to this. And he was always annoyed. He said, he would say it in public and just sort of enjoyed saying it. He said, I don't need a black leader. So, but in a way, there are a lot of black leaders, but if they're leading us toward liberty and less government, they're despised by the so-called black leaders that Walter Williams couldn't stand.
Yeah, like Clarence Thomas, how they hate him with the passion.
Oh, yeah, still.
Yeah, they hate him with the passion.
The government had to come in and, you know, make sure that everybody got to go to medical school that wanted to, especially the minorities. So then they have to give them money, and then they have to give them control. One leads to another. There was a contrivance even back in 2010 to move in this direction. But guess what? I think 1910 is very close to that period we call the progressive era, and that was some of this nonsense. So many of our problems, you know, can be traced to bad government judgment, bad politicians who think more of power and money, and we're facing that. But they're still alive and well. A lot of people are sick and tired of it, and they're waking up and they're rebelling against this nonsense. So that's what we have to encourage: people who believe in peace and prosperity to move in the direction of emphasizing personal liberty.